The government expenditure increased from 20.7 billion to 21.2 billion in our local currency, which is equivalent to 200 million US dollars to 210 million US dollars. So contributing to this increase, it also led to a rise in budget deficit because the government then had pressure to spend more than it had. So it had to create a debt in order to finance its day-to-day expenditures. The research objectives. Why this study? What's the main objective of carrying out this study? Well, this study seeks to evaluate the impact of government expenditure, foreign direct investments, level of taxation, and public debt ratio on the economy of Swaziland by means of regression analysis. And this study also seeks to test whether the Keynesian school of thought or Wagner laws of economic growth apply in the economy of Swaziland. The Wagner school of thought is more like contrary to the Keynesian. It states that a rise in economic growth leads to a rise in government spending. So this study basically tests which one of the these theories exist. And thirdly, this study seeks to investigate the relationship between fiscal policy and economic growth. And lastly, it makes recommendations on how fiscal adjustments can enhance economic growth in the case of Swaziland. Research questions. I think some of these questions have already been highlighted in the objective. It's just a matter of clearing them out and making them clear to the audience. One research question would be, what effect does government expenditure, foreign direct investments, level of taxation, and public debt ratio have in the economy of Swaziland? The other one would be, which law between the Keynesian and the Wagner law apply in the case of Swaziland? And lastly, the research question is, do fiscal instruments enhance economic growth in Swaziland, that is taxation and government expenditure? Justification of the study. Well, the study is necessary for the case of Swaziland since it will bring recommendations that can contribute and add into literature on fiscal reforms that can be introduced to come up to sustainable economic growth. Research design. This is a quantitative study which makes use of regression analysis or econometric models which seeks to analyze economic data sets in order to establish the existence of short-run and long-run relationships. So basically the variables that I've mentioned earlier, the study will evaluate the existence of short and long-run effects on the GDP, which is a proxy for economic growth. Methodology. This study makes use of the autoregressive distributed lag model. Why the auto-distributed lag model for the study? One is that this model works well for variables which are of order I1 and I0. When we talk of I1 and I0, you're talking of variables that are stationary in their initial order or that are stationary after first differencing, which is the case for most economic variables. And again, this study is necessary to establish short-run and long-run dynamics, which is a necessity for economic variables. You have to determine whenever you introduce a certain policy, what effect will it have in the short run and what effect will it have in the long run. And thirdly, this study, this model is suitable for small samples. Usually in statistics, small samples when n is less than 30, which means when sample size is less than 30. So this study uses annual data from 1995 to 2015, which is 25 years. So that's why I use this methodology as well. And lastly, this methodology will present the nature and the strength of the relationship that exists between economic growth and the variables. Model specification. This is how the model works. I won't bore you much with the formulas. This is just the regression. This is a matter of running a regression with legs. Yes. Okay, in our case, the dependent variable is GDP, and the independent variables are the debt ratio, the level of taxation, foreign direct investment, and government expenditure. So that is what this formula denotes. It's denoted in prefixes, and then they are then explained here. So that is how it works. Somewhat of the model. This was the test that we conducted in order to arrive to the autoregressive distributed lag model. Since before using the model, you have to test for the assumptions first. You cannot just use the model without testing whether it's best or for that kind of data set. Firstly, the stationarity test was conducted in order to determine the I1 and the I0 that I mentioned earlier. And secondly, the unrestricted error correction model was formulated in order to establish the existence of a short-run relationship. And then again, since this is a regression, autoregressive distributed lag model, there was legs were selected, and the lag criterion that was used was the AIC, and the regression with the highest AIC was selected. And then the bounce test was then tested for those variables which had a long-run relationship after conducting the restricted error correction model. And then lastly was we ran the regression with legs in order to determine the regression coefficients, which give you the nature of the relationship, whether it's positive or negative. And lastly, the model was tested whether it is stable or not, like after running the regression, using the Ramsey set test for stability. So, summary of the results. All the variables were stationary after first differencing, like the variables that the public debt ratio, the government expenditure, and the level of taxation. Only FDI was stationary at its initial order. So therefore, that means that I can proceed with the model, since it works with I1 and I0. And then all the variables were co-integrated like an unresisted ECM. That means that all the variables have a short-run relationship. And for the long-run relationship, FDI didn't have a long-run relationship. Otherwise, all the others had a long-run relationship. And then I also conducted the Granger causality test for the GDP and economic growth. And after running that causality test, I found that the GDP does not grow in Granger because government expenditure. That means that a rise in the GDP does not necessarily mean a rise in the government expenditure, or it doesn't guarantee. Basically, what Granger causality means that it means variable X can be used to explain variable Y, or variable Y can be used to measure variable X, or vice versa. So basically, for the case of the GDP and government expenditure, there is no Granger causality. So then the regression with legs was ran, and the test for stability was done, and the model was found to be dynamically stable. So now I'll move on to the results. So the result for the 8-year model were as follows. So these are basically the short-run coefficients. So just like you can see from the model, all the variables in the short run, they have a positive effect on the economic growth, looking at the coefficient. But the outstanding one in this case was the FDI, since according to those results over there, a 1 unit increase in FDI will result to as in 1 unit, I'm talking in terms of money, will result to a 56 cents increase in GDP in the short run. So that is what these coefficients are basically saying. But then, in the long run, the FDI drops because after running the bounce test, there is no long-run relationship between FDI and GDP. So that's why it's not there for the long-run coefficients. But what is worth highlighting for the long run is that the debt ratio in the long run, it has got a negative effect on the GDP. And the level of taxation, surprisingly, it has a positive effect on the GDP in the long run. I'll explain when getting to the discussion why this. And then lastly, the government expenditure have a positive effect on the GDP in the long run. A 1 unit rise in government expenditure will leads to a 42 cents increase in GDP in the long run. Discussion of results. From the results that I've discussed, we find that there's a long-run relationship between government expenditure, level of taxation, or there is a long-run relationship between level of taxation, government expenditure, and public debt ratio in the long run. For the public debt ratio, it is negative, and for the other two coefficients, which is level of taxation and government expenditure, it is positive. The reason for the public debt, why it is negative for the public debt ratio, is that in the long run, what public debt does, it leads to distortion in the money supply, which means it increases the money supply, so such that there is a capacity for people to spend more, because the government then has money. It can then it has the capacity to pump in more into the economy. But then in the long run, what then happens, the consequences of paying the debt, they erode away the fiscal revenues, and therefore it then constructs the government expenditure, because the government then has to service the debt, and therefore that results to a negative relationship. So again, economic growth does not cause government expenditure. So that means that, just like I explained earlier, which means that in the case of the Swazi economy, it is not Wetna, but instead it is Keynesian. Just like the third bullet is saying over here, like that economic growth depends on fiscal policy, since this is shown by the high correlation coefficient of government expenditure and the level of taxation. And I've explained the last bullet. Conclusion. Okay, the study shows that there is a positive long-run relationship between fiscal policy and economic growth, that is denoted by the positive relationship between government expenditure, level of taxation, on economic growth. Therefore, this means that it is important for the government to concentrate on government spending and level of taxation as important fiscal variables. The Swazi economy, the economy of Swaziland, is also supportive of the Keynesian theory, which says that a rise in government expenditure or much government intervention leads to an increase, it leads to economic growth. That is the traditional Keynesian school of thought theory. The last one would be to look at the recommendations. What am I recommending after this study? So basically, what this study, according to the results, this study is therefore recommending that the government should therefore diversify its sources of revenue, since this study has shown that if the more it spends on the economy, the more it grows. And then that also means that the Swaziland Revenue Authority has to continue to diversify its sources of revenue and continue working on strategies to improve compliance, since we all know that tax is the main source of government revenue. And then thirdly, FDI, for the case of Swaziland, can only be used to influence the economy positively in the long run, in the short run, since there is no significant effect in the long run. Maybe I can explain why this, according to literature that is in the paper, of which I didn't highlight it here because of time. The reason why FDI only affects the economy positively in the short run is that in the long run, multinationals are never willing to invest their profits locally. What they do instead, they focus on short-term benefits, that is hiring staff and giving most of the time poverty wages, and then again they take their profits away to their countries of origin. But those effects are not seen in the short run when that multinational establishes, but they are seen in the long run when the actual profits are being taken away. So that is why it doesn't have an effect, which means basically I wouldn't say FDI benefits our economy. And then again, according to the findings for my country, it means that the public debt should be controlled to reduce its negative impacts in the long run. Since, according to the results, you can tell that public debt ratio has a negative effect. And the other thing that I can mention about public debt is that it should only be used for viable capital projects. You cannot create a debt just for consumption, because it will constrain the fiscal revenues more in the long run. Because basically what will happen, you can look at this at micro level, like for your household. If you create a debt, or if you just take a loan for your own consumption, or maybe you don't come up with any capital project, and then again that will have a negative effect on the disposable income, because you will have to use the same income to service the debt. And yet, if you use the debt for an income generating project, the debt will sustain itself. So same thing applies to a country. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention.